Chapter 1. The wind howled through the narrow streets of London's Mayfair district, rattling the windows of the prestigious Clarendon House. Inside the opulent drawing-room, bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, a small but distinguished gathering of guests murmured in hushed voices. The conversation was light, the laughter measured, yet there was an undeniable undercurrent of unease in the air. At the heart of the affair was Mr. Aloysius Cain, a man of wealth, charm, and impeccable manners, but with a most peculiar distinction. No one knew where he had come from. Mr. Cain had arrived in London 2 years prior, stepping into high society with the confidence of an aristocrat. He hosted lavish dinners, attended exclusive galas, and spoke knowledgeably of art, literature, and finance. Yet, despite his social prominence, not a soul could say where he had lived before, who his family was, or even his true origins. When Cheer asked about his past, he would smile with an air of practised amusement and deflect with a charming anecdote. It had been a subject of whispered speculation for months, but none dared to press the matter too far. Until tonight. At precisely 8:30, as the butler refilled glasses of fine champagne, a shriek pierced the air, shattering the evening's facade of elegance. The guests turned toward the grand staircase, where Lady Beatrice Langley, a middle-aged widow with a penchant for dramatic outbursts, stood clutching the banister. Her face, usually painted with the subtle hues of aristocratic grace, was now ghostly pale. "My God! Look! It's him! He's dead!" The air thickened with gasps. Footsteps thundered as the guests rushed toward the adjacent study, where Lady Beatrice pointed with a trembling finger. There, slumped in a leather armchair, was the motionless figure of Aloysius Cain. His eyes were frozen in an expression of mild surprise, his usually impeccable cravat slightly loosened. A single glass of wine sat on the mahogany desk beside him, undisturbed. Dr. Alistair Green, a guest at the party, stepped forward, placing 2 fingers against the man's throat. He frowned. "He's gone," the doctor said grimly. "Dead." Dreadful silence fell over the room, save for the distant chime of a clock marking the hour. Aloysius Cain, the man without a past, had met a most abrupt end. The police arrived within the hour, led by Inspector Harold Clements, a seasoned officer with sharp eyes and a sharper temper. After a cursory examination, he turned to the gathered guests. No sign of a struggle, no visible wounds, and no disturbance in the room. That leaves poison as the most likely cause. And since Mr. Cain was in perfect health just an hour ago, it seems the poison was administered tonight. His gaze swept over the attendees. "Which means one of you did it." Murmurs of protest and indignation rippled through the crowd, but the inspector was unmoved. He continued his questioning, methodically piecing together the final moments of the deceased. Yet, even as he worked, an uneasy feeling gnawed at him. There was something peculiar about this crime, something just beyond reach. That was when a voice, crisp and deliberate, cut through the murmur of conversation. "Might I be of assistance, mon cher inspecteur?" Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a grey 3-piece suit, was Hercule Poirot. His neatly waxed moustache twitched ever so slightly as he stepped into the room, surveying the scene with keen, intelligent eyes. was passing by when I heard of this most unfortunate affair," Poirot continued, his hands neatly clasped behind his back. "And as you may know, I have a certain expertise in matters of a most criminal nature." Inspector Clement exhaled heavily, rubbing his temple. "You again, Poirot?" "Indeed, mon ami." Poirot smiled. "And unless I am very much mistaken, this case, it is not so simple as it appears." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, because if Hercule Poirot was here, it meant that beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward crime, something far more devious was at play, and for the first time that evening, a chill passed through the room, one not caused by the winter wind outside. The game had begun. Chapter 2a. Hush settled over the room as Hercule Poirot surveyed the assembled guests. His gaze, sharp and deliberate, flickered across their faces, each one a carefully composed mask of shock, curiosity, and in some cases barely concealed apprehension. Aloysius Kane was dead, and among these people stood his murderer. Inspector Clements folded his arms, eyeing Poirot warily. "Well then, Monsieur Poirot, since you're here, let's hear your brilliant theory. A case of simple poisoning, is it not?" Poirot tilted his head, a small knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Ah, mon cher inspector, to assume simplicity in matters of murder is to blind oneself to the truth. A man such as Monsieur Kane, how curious that he should meet his end at such an opportune moment." "No." Clements frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot gestured toward the lifeless body slumped in the leather armchair. "Consider, if you will, the peculiar circumstances surrounding Monsieur Kane. A man of means, of impeccable taste, yet a man with no past, and now, most conveniently, he is silenced before his past may catch up with him." A murmur rippled through the guests. Lady Beatrice Langley, still pale from the shock, clutched her pearls tightly. "You mean to say that someone killed him to keep his past a secret?" Poirot's dark eyes gleamed. "It is a possibility we must consider, madam." Inspector Clements cleared his throat. "We're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's stick to the facts. This was a closed gathering. Everyone present tonight must be questioned." He turned to the butler standing stiffly by the doorway. "First things first, when was the last time Mr. Kane was seen alive?" The butler, Mr. Griffith, a severe-looking man with silver hair and a rigid posture, inclined his head. "About an hour before the discovery, sir." Mr. Kane had excused himself from the drawing-room, saying he wished to attend to a private matter in his study. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And did he seem troubled, agitated?" Griffith hesitated. "Not troubled, sir, but unusually serious, almost as if he were deep in thought." Inspector Clements scribbled something in his notebook. "And did anyone else enter the study before Lady Beatrice found the body?" Another pause. Then, reluctantly, Griffith replied, "No, a letter, I believe." "And where is this letter now?" Silence. The guests glanced at one another, and then back at the desk where the glass of wine stood untouched. There was no letter in sight. Poirot's smile widened. "Ah, a letter that has vanished." Inspector Clements sighed. "So we're looking for a missing piece of evidence. Fine. Let's get to the guests, then." The questioning began. Lady Beatrice Langley. A widow of old aristocracy, Lady Beatrice was the first to find the body. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, dramatically exhaling between sentences. "I was only going to check on dear Mr. Kane, you see. He had been gone for quite some time, and I thought he might be feeling unwell. And then, oh, the horror, I found him like that." Poirot studied her carefully. "And why were you concerned for his health, madam?" She blinked. "Well, it is only that he seemed preoccupied this evening. Distracted." "Distracted by what, Lady Langley?" "I couldn't say, Mr. Poirot. But when I last spoke to him, he asked a rather peculiar question." Poirot leaned forward. "And what was that?" Lady Beatrice hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. "He asked me whether I believed that a man could truly escape his past." A thoughtful hum escaped Poirot's lips. "And what did you say?" She swallowed. "I told him that the past always catches up with us in one way or another." Poirot's moustache twitched. "How very prophetic, madam." Dr. Alistair Green next was Dr. Green, a well-respected physician with a no-nonsense demeanour. He spoke in a clipped tone, irritated by the disruption to his evening. "Kane was in perfect health when I last saw him," he stated flatly. "No signs of distress, no symptoms of poisoning." "Doctor," Poirot said mildly, "as a man of science, you must be familiar with poisons that leave no immediate trace." Green's eyes darkened. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" Poirot smiled. "Oh, I suggest nothing, mon docteur. I only inquire." The doctor scowled, but said nothing more. Miss Evelyn Carrington, the young, strikingly beautiful Miss Carrington, draped in an emerald gown, was next. She had been seen speaking privately with Mr. Kane earlier in the evening. "Mr. Kane and I were discussing financial matters," she said with careful neutrality. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Financial matters, mademoiselle." She sighed. "If you must know, Mr. Kane had promised to invest in a project of mine, but he had grown hesitant as of late." Poirot tilted his head. "Hesitant how?" Miss Carrington hesitated. "He mentioned something about needing to move his assets quickly, as if he was afraid they might be taken from him." "Fascinating," Poirot murmured. By the time the questioning ended, Poirot sat back with a thoughtful expression. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a shape, yet something remained elusive. A man without a past, suddenly in a hurry to protect his wealth. A missing letter. A poisoned drink that no one had seen him consume. And most curiously of all, several suspects, each with their own secrets. Poirot steepled his fingers. "There is much that does not yet make sense. But, mon ami, I assure you, there is a great secret lurking in this room." Inspector Clements sighed. "And how do you propose we uncover it?" Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Why, my dear Inspector, we must be patient, because when a murderer believes he is safe, that is when he will make his greatest mistake." And with that, Poirot's eyes twinkled. The game was afoot. Chapter 3. Hercule Poirot remained seated, fingers delicately steepled, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Around him, the air in the drawing-room was thick with tension. The guests had all been questioned, but rather than providing clarity, their statements had only deepened the mystery. Inspector Clements rubbed his temples. "We have a body," a missing letter, and a whole room full of people with motives. But what we don't have is a clear method of murder. If it was poison, how was it administered? The wine-glass was untouched. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but, mon cher, that is where you make the mistake. You assume the poison was in the wine. Clemens shot him a sharp look. If it wasn't, then where? Poirot rose to his feet and began to pace, his polished shoes clicking softly against the parquet floor. His eyes flickered over the elegant furnishings, the heavy velvet curtains, the gold-trimmed fireplace, a room built for wealth and comfort, and yet tonight it was a stage for something far darker. "Tell me, Lady Langley," Poirot said suddenly, turning to the widow. "You found the body. You say he was slumped in his chair, his face tranquil. Yes?" Lady Beatrice swallowed, nodding. Yes, he looked as if he had simply fallen asleep. Poirot tilted his head. Curious, is it not? Poisonings are rarely so peaceful. The body convulses, the face contorts in agony, unless the poison used was of a particular nature. Dr. Green frowned. "Are you suggesting a sedative, Poirot?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Perhaps something more subtle, something that does not announce itself with immediate distress. A substance that lulls its victim into weakness before death claims them." Miss Carrington exhaled sharply. "That's a rather horrifying thought." Poirot's sharp eyes turned to her. "Indeed, mademoiselle. And yet murder is never anything but horrifying, n'est-ce pas?" A nervous silence settled over the room. Inspector Clemens cleared his throat. "Right, then. If the wine wasn't the source, then what was?" Poirot turned to the butler. "Mr. Griffith, what was Monsieur Cain's last meal?" Griffith straightened. "He did not dine this evening, sir. Only a small tray of biscuits and cheese, which he requested in his study." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And who brought him this tray?" Griffith hesitated for the briefest moment before replying, "I did, sir." The room seemed to tighten with tension. Poirot stepped closer. "Tell me, Monsieur Griffith, did you see Monsieur Cain eat from this tray?" Griffith shook his head. "No, sir. I placed it on his desk and left. I did not return until after his body was discovered." Poirot nodded. "And where is this tray now?" Griffith glanced toward the study. "Still in there, I assume." Clements turned sharply. "Right. Let's have a look then." The study was dimly lit, the air tinged with the faint scent of old books and polished wood. The tray sat knife that lay beside it. He turned it in the light, observing a faint, almost imperceptible sheen. "Inspector," Poirot murmured, holding up the knife, "if you please, have this tested." Clemens frowned. "You think the poison was on the knife?" Poirot's gaze was thoughtful. "Or perhaps the cheese itself was tampered with. Either way, I believe our method of murder is beginning to take shape." Miss Carrington stepped forward. "But why would Cain eat something if it had poison on it? Wouldn't he taste it?" Poirot's expression remained serene. "Ah, mademoiselle, there are poisons with no taste, no scent, only a slow creeping effect. Perhaps he noticed something was wrong. Perhaps that is why he wrote the letter." Lady Beatrice gasped. "The letter?" Poirot turned sharply. "Yes, madame, the missing letter. Someone took it, and I begin to suspect that whoever did so is the murderer." Back in the drawing room, Poirot surveyed the assembled guests. His gaze lingered on each of them, measuring their reactions. Lady Beatrice, nervous, twisting her pearls. Dr. Green, impatient, arms crossed. Miss Carrington, tense, hands clasped. Griffith, the ever-faithful butler, standing stiffly. Poirot took a breath, then spoke. The poison was likely administered through the food. That much, I believe, is now evident. Inspector Clements folded his arms. And the letter, what do you think it contained? Poirot's gaze was unreadable. A confession, perhaps, or a name. A truth that someone was desperate to erase. Heavy silence. Then, unexpectedly, the door swung open. A young constable entered, looking flustered. "Inspector, we found something in the fireplace." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, and what, may I ask, have you found?" The constable held up a charred scrap of paper. The edges were blackened, but in the centre a few words remained legible. Poirot leaned in, reading aloud. "Must act fast. He knows the past danger." A slow smile curled on Poirot's lips. "Ah, the past. It seems, mes amis, that Monsieur Cain's past did not wish to remain buried after all." He turned to face the guests, his voice calm but resolute. "Now, my friends, the question remains. Who among you was so afraid of the past that they chose to kill or to keep it hidden?" The room fell into silence, and Poirot knew, before the night was over, the answer would reveal itself. Chapter 4. The discovery of the charred letter fragment sent ripples of unease through the room. Every face was drawn, every pair of eyes shifting, searching. The past was a dangerous thing, one that could bring reputations to ruin, one that could drive a person to kill. Poirot stood still, letting the weight of his words settle over the guests. He had long learned that silence was as much a tool as speech. Let them stew in their thoughts. Let them wonder how much he knew. Lady Beatrice was the first to break. This is preposterous. We don't even know if that letter belonged to Andrew." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, madam, but I think we do. Tell me, who else in this house feared their past enough to burn a letter?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. Green exhaled sharply. "Even if it was his, it proves nothing. For all we know, he was involved in something disreputable. It doesn't mean one of us killed him." Poirot turned his gaze on the doctor. "Ah, but you assume the letter was written by him. What if, instead, it was written to him?" Dr. Green blinked. "To warn him? Just so." Poirot steepled his fingers. "The question is, who would have sent such a warning?" The guests exchanged uncertain glances. Poirot took a step forward. "I believe, mes amis, that someone in this house knew the victim's true identity." Miss Carrington inhaled sharply. "True identity?" Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, the past Monsieur Cain feared may not have been his past at all, but rather a past belonging to the man he once was." A sharp silence followed. It was Griffith, the butler, who spoke next. His voice was quiet but firm. "You are suggesting, Mr. Poirot, that Mr. Cain was living under an assumed name?" Poirot smiled. "It would explain much, would it not?" A hush fell over the room. The implications were staggering. Poirot turned to Inspector Clements. "Tell me, my friend, when you investigated Monsieur Kane's background, did you find anything unusual?" Clements hesitated. "Nothing out of the ordinary. A wealthy man, recently settled here, no known family. His fortune came from investments, though his records only go back about 10 years. Poirot's smile deepened. "Ah, and before that?" Clements frowned. "It's unclear. Some records indicate he lived abroad, but there's nothing concrete." Poirot turned back to the guests. "You see, Monsieur Kane was a man without a past. Or rather, a man with a past he wished to erase." Lady Beatrice clutched her pearls. But why? What was he hiding? Poirot's gaze swept over them. "That, my dear lady, is the key to this mystery. I suspect someone in this house knew the truth, and feared what would happen if it came to light." He let the words settle before delivering his next blow. And so they silenced him. A gasp, a sharp intake of breath, Miss Carrington's hands clenched. Poirot lifted a finger. "But the past, mes amis, is not so easily buried. Someone tried to destroy that letter, but it did not burn completely." Inspector Clements held up the fragment once more. "He knows. The past. Danger." Poirot's voice was quiet, but firm. "Someone was afraid. Someone acted. And I intend to find out who." A heavy silence. Then, suddenly, a loud crash rang through the house. Everyone turned. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he murmured. "It seems our murderer is growing desperate." Chapter 5. The sharp crash reverberated through the grand halls of Blackwood Manor, shattering the tense silence that had gripped the guests. Poirot's keen eyes flickered towards the source of the noise, a distant corridor leading towards Andrew Kane's study. Without hesitation, he strode forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Inspector Clements followed, his hand instinctively hovering near his revolver. The guests hesitated, but curiosity outweighed fear, and they trailed behind. As Poirot entered the dimly lit study, he was met with a scene of disorder. A small wooden table had, noting every detail with the precision of a surgeon. He crouched beside the scattered papers, picking up a single sheet. His eyes narrowed. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "It seems our murderer has been searching for something." Inspector Clements turned to the gathered guests, his voice sharp. "Who was in this room?" No one spoke. The only sound was the distant hoot of an owl from the manor grounds. Poirot straightened, holding up the paper he had retrieved. This was torn from a ledger, n'est-ce pas? A financial record, perhaps. Lady Beatrice peered at the page and paled. "That's from Andrew's personal accounts. He kept meticulous records. But this isn't his handwriting." Miss Carrington stepped forward, frowning. "Then whose is it?" Poirot examined the elegant but slightly uneven script. "A question most intriguing, mademoiselle. This was written by someone else, someone who had access to his finances." Tense silence. Then a voice from the doorway. "I believe that would be me." The group turned. Griffith the butler stood tall, his weathered face unreadable. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, Monsieur Griffith, you managed Mr. Kane's financial affairs?" The butler nodded. "Mr. Kane entrusted me with certain accounts. I kept ledgers of his transactions, payments, and investments." His gaze drifted to the scattered papers. "But this This page doesn't belong to any record I maintained." Poirot's keen eyes flickered with interest. "Alors, then someone forged it." Dr. Green frowned. "But why? What would they gain?" Poirot turned the paper over, revealing the faint imprint of another sheet beneath it. He traced the indentations with his fingertips before slipping the page into his pocket. "That, my dear doctor, is the question we must answer." A sudden gust of wind rustled through the study, sending another sheet of paper fluttering to the ground. Poirot bent and retrieved it. His brows lifted as he read the single line scrawled in the corner. "If he remembers, he dies." The guests recoiled. Lady Beatrice clutched at her pearls, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good heavens, what does it mean?" Poirot's voice was calm, deliberate. "It means, madame, that our Monsieur Kane was not merely a man without a past. He was a man running from one." Inspector Clements exhaled sharply. Someone wanted to make sure he never remembered. Poirot nodded. "And now, mes amis, we must uncover what it was he was meant to forget." A tense silence. Then another noise. A distant creak, like footsteps on wood. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The past is a most persistent thing," he murmured, "and I fear it is not yet done with us." Chapter 6a. Sharp breath of wind rattled the windows of Blackwood Manor, sending an eerie chill through the gathered guests. Poirot stood still, his head slightly tilted as he listened. Somewhere in the depths of the house, the faint creak of floorboards betrayed the presence of someone unseen. Inspector Clements turned sharply, signaling one of his constables to investigate. The man nodded and disappeared into the corridor, his footsteps fading into the distance. Poirot, however, remained where he was, his mind working at a rapid pace. He held the torn ledger page between two fingers, studying the faint imprints beneath the ink. If he remembers, he dies. A warning or a promise fulfilled? Lady Beatrice's voice, tight with tension, cut through the silence. "Monsieur Poirot, do you believe Andrew was being threatened before he died?" Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. "Threatened? Ah, perhaps. But I suspect it was more than that. Someone feared what he might recall." Miss Carrington frowned. But why now? He'd been here for weeks, blending into village life without incident. Poirot smiled faintly. "A most excellent question, mademoiselle." "Why, indeed?" Dr. Green, who had been standing apart from the others, suddenly cleared his throat. Perhaps something triggered his memory. The room fell into silence. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ah, doctor," he murmured, stepping closer, "that is a most perceptive thought. But tell me, what might have caused such a thing?" Dr. Green hesitated. His fingers twitched at his side, as if grasping for an answer he dared not speak. "It could be anything," he said at last. "A sound, a phrase, a particular scent. The mind is a curious thing. A forgotten past may lie dormant for years, only to be awakened by the most trivial of stimuli." Poirot nodded. And what, I wonder, was the stimulus in this case? His words hung in the air, thick with implication. No one spoke. The constable returned, shaking his head. "Nothing, sir. Whoever it was, they're gone." Poirot sighed, turning to the overturned table. He crouched, studying the broken porcelain vase. A small glint of metal caught his eye. half hidden beneath the shards. He reached forward and carefully plucked it from the wreckage. A cufflink, silver, with an intricate design etched into its surface. Poirot turned it over in his palm, his expression unreadable. "This," he announced, "does not belong to Monsieur Kane." The guests exchanged wary glances. Inspector Clements took the cufflink, scrutinizing it. "Do you recognize this emblem, Poirot?" Poirot's lips twitched upward. "But of course, it is the crest of the Montclair family." Lady Beatrice gasped. The Montclairs! But they were ruined years ago. Their fortune was lost. Scandal and disgrace followed them. Poirot's gaze flickered. "And yet, my dear lady, their mark has resurfaced in the study of a murdered man." A hush fell over the group. Miss Carrington's voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't think the Montclairs have something to do with Andrew's past?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He slipped the cufflink into his pocket, his expression thoughtful. "I think, mademoiselle," he said at last, "that we must pay a visit to a certain individual who might shed light on this mystery." Inspector Clements crossed his arms. And who might that be? Poirot adjusted his cuffs with deliberate precision. The last surviving member of the Montclair family. The room seemed to grow colder. Lady Beatrice exhaled sharply. "You mean Victor Montclair?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Précisément." A distant clap of thunder rumbled through the night, and with it the past crept ever closer. Chapter 7. The drive to Montclair House was long and silent. The road twisted through the countryside, flanked by towering oaks, whose skeletal branches clawed at the sky. The rain had subsided, but a heavy anxiety, only to fall into disgrace when his family's fortune was lost in a series of dubious financial dealings. And now, somehow, the Montclair crest had reappeared in the study of a murdered man. Montclair House itself was a crumbling relic of its former grandeur. Its once white pillars were stained with time, its great doors worn and weathered. No lights shone from its windows, and for a moment Miss Carrington hesitated. "Are we certain he still lives here?" she murmured. Poirot stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs. "Mademoiselle, one does not so easily discard one's past. If Montclair is here, we shall find him." Inspector Clements knocked, the sound echoing hollowly through the house. A long pause followed before the door creaked open. A figure stood in the dim light of the hallway. Victor Montclair. He had the air of a man who had once been handsome, but had since withered under the weight of his misfortunes. His face was gaunt, his silver hair unkempt, and his eyes, cold and calculating, flicked between the visitors with suspicion. "I don't receive guests," he said flatly. Poirot smiled. "Ah, but we are not mere guests, monsieur. We are seekers of truth." Montclair's gaze settled on Poirot with a flicker of recognition. Then, with a sigh, he stepped aside. 5 minutes, he muttered. The interior of Montclair House was as neglected as its exterior. Heavy drapes blocked out most of the daylight, and the air carried the faint scent of dust and old books. A fire smouldered in the hearth, casting long shadows. Poirot took a seat without waiting for an invitation. "Monsieur Montclair, you are a man of discretion, I am sure. Yet you must permit me to be direct. What was your connection to Andrew Kane?" Montclair stiffened at the name. His fingers drummed against the arm of his chair. "I don't know him," he said curtly. Inspector Clements frowned. "Then how do you explain this?" He produced the cuff-link from his pocket, setting it on the table. Montclair's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. His jaw clenched, his fingers stilled. "Family heirloom," he said at last. "I lost it years ago." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze sharp. Curious, then, that it should appear at the scene of a murder. Silence. Miss Carrington, who had been watching intently, spoke for the first time. "You're lying." Montclair turned to her, eyes narrowing. "And you are?" Someone who can see guilt when it's staring her in the face. A bitter chuckle escaped Montclair's lips. He reached for a glass of brandy on the table and took a slow sip. "If I am guilty of anything, mademoiselle, it is of being a fool. My family was once powerful, once respected. But the Montclair name became synonymous with failure. I lost everything." Poirot tilted his head. "Except, it seems, a connection to a dead man." Montclair set the glass down with deliberate care. "You misunderstand me, Monsieur Poirot. I had nothing to do with this crime. But if Andrew Kane, whoever he truly was, possessed that cuff-link, then it means only one thing." Poirot remained silent, allowing the man to continue. Montclair's voice was barely above a whisper. "He was one of us." The room seemed to close in, around them. The fire crackled, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A Montclair?" Montclair exhaled slowly. "Not by blood. But once, long ago, there was an arrangement. My father had debts, enemies. To escape them, he made a desperate bargain. A child was taken in, given a name that was not his own." Miss Carrington's breath caught. "You mean—" Montclair met her gaze. "Andrew Kane didn't exist. At least, not before he came here." Poirot sat back, fingers steepled. "And someone killed him to ensure he never discovered the truth." The revelation settled over them like a thick fog. Poirot smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Ah, we are beginning to see the shape of things." Montclair said nothing, but in his silence Poirot heard everything. Chapter 8a. Heavy stillness settled over the room. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, sending flickering shadows across the walls. Poirot's keen gaze never wavered from Victor Montclair, who sat rigid in his chair, his fingers tracing slow circles around the rim of his empty glass. "You have given us much to consider, monsieur," Poirot murmured. "A man with no past, connected to a family that has every reason to forget him. Tell me, what else do you know about Andrew Kane?" Montclair sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You assume I know more than I do, Poirot. My father was a secretive man, and whatever arrangements he made in the past were buried with him. But I do remember one thing." Poirot leaned forward. "Oui? A letter. Years ago, before my father's death, I found it among his papers. It was unsigned, but it referenced an arrangement concerning a child, a boy who was to be placed under the Montclair name temporarily. A debt repaid, it said. Nothing more." Miss Carrington frowned. "But if Andrew Kane was only using the Montclair name temporarily, what became of him afterward?" Montclair shook his head. I don't know. The letter was vague, and my father never spoke of it. But if Cain truly was that boy, then someone else must have known the truth. Someone who wanted it buried. Poirot sat back, tapping his fingertips together. Indeed. And that brings us to the question. Who had the most to lose if Andrew Cain discovered his origins? Inspector Clements, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. Could it be that Cain was blackmailing someone? If he found out about his past, perhaps he tried to use it to his advantage. Poirot nodded. A most intriguing possibility, mon ami. And if he was killed for what he knew? Miss Carrington finished the thought. Then the murderer is someone who feared exposure. Montclair let out a bitter laugh. You're assuming that I'm not that someone, Poirot. Poirot merely smiled. No, monsieur, I am assuming nothing. But if you were involved, you would not have let us in so easily, nor would you have spoken so freely. No, whoever wished Cain dead is someone still hiding in the shadows, watching carefully to ensure their secrets remain undiscovered. The fire crackled again, a sudden pop of embers sending a faint glow against Poirot's face. His expression remained unreadable, his little grey cells working tirelessly through the tangled web of deception. Ah, an excellent suggestion. And who, pray, would these individuals be? Montclair hesitated. Many are dead, but there is one man, Cyril Ashford. He was my father's lawyer. If anyone knew of this arrangement, it would be him. Inspector Clements scribbled the name into his notebook. Where can we find him? Montclair's lips curled into a wry smile. That will be the difficult part. Cyril Ashford disappeared 20 years ago. A charged silence followed. Poirot's moustache twitched. Disappeared, you say? Montclair nodded. Vanished without a trace. Some say he fled the country after a scandal. Others claim he died, though no body was ever found. All I know is that if Andrew Cain was seeking answers about his past, Ashford's name would have been among the first he uncovered. Miss Carrington crossed her arms. Which means that if Cain found Ashford before he was murdered... Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then we must ask, did Cain's death have anything to do with what he learned from Cyril Ashford? The fire crackled again, and the weight of the mystery deepened. Poirot rose from his chair, straightening his cuffs with precision. I believe, mes amis, it is time to follow the path of the vanished man. Inspector Clements sighed. And where exactly do we start looking for someone who's been missing for 2 decades? Poirot's lips curled into a knowing smile. By searching where no one else has dared to look. Chapter 10. The grand drawing-room of the Montclair estate was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the ornate grandfather clock. The assembled guests, Miss Carrington, Victor Montclair, Inspector Clements, Lady Edith Ashford, and the nervous maid Alice, sat tensely in their chairs. At the centre of it all, standing with his hands clasped before him, was Hercule Poirot. His moustache twitched as he regarded the room with an air of quiet satisfaction. It is time, mes amis, Poirot announced. Time to reveal the truth of the affair of the man without a past. Lady Ashford scoffed. And what truth would that be, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot turned his sharp gaze toward her. That Andrew Cain was never truly without a past, madame. He was, in fact, a man desperately seeking the truth of his origins. and what he discovered led to his murder. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Poirot continued. Let us begin with what we know. Andrew Cain, as we now understand, was born under a different name. As a child, he was placed under the guardianship of the Montclair family. But why? The answer lies with a certain missing figure, Cyril Ashford. Inspector Clements nodded grimly. And yet Ashford disappeared 20 years ago. Poirot raised a finger. Ah, but that is where the clever deception begins. You see, mon ami, Cyril Ashford never truly disappeared. He was silenced permanently. A gasp rang out. Montclair stiffened in his chair. You mean he was murdered? Exactly, Poirot confirmed. Cyril Ashford knew too much. He was the lawyer who handled the arrangement concerning young Andrew Cain. And when he began asking the wrong questions, he was removed. Poirot turned toward Lady Edith Ashford, his gaze piercing. You, madam, know more than you admit. She stiffened, her fingers gripping the armrest of her chair. That's absurd. Is it? Poirot's voice was smooth, unshaken. Your late husband was a man who kept secrets, n'est-ce pas? And you were his closest confidant. Did you never wonder why Cyril Ashford disappeared so suddenly? Or why, after his vanishing, a certain sum of money appeared in your husband's accounts? Lady Ashford paled. I had nothing to do with that. Poirot smiled knowingly. Perhaps not directly, madam, but let us move forward, for the most important revelation is yet to come. He stepped toward the hearth, where the fire cast dancing shadows along the walls. The room hung on his every word. You see, mes amis, Andrew Cain did find something before he died, and that something was a birth certificate, one that proved his real parentage. Miss Carrington inhaled sharply. Whose son was he? Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. Andrew Cain was the illegitimate son of Lionel Montclair, Victor, Montclair's father. A stunned silence fell. Victor Montclair staggered back in his chair. No, that's impossible. But it is not impossible, monsieur, Poirot said gently. Your father had a secret affair. When the child was born, he sought to cover his tracks, placing the boy under an assumed identity. Cyril Ashford was the one who arranged everything, and later paid the price for knowing too much. Inspector Clements let out a slow breath. Then Andrew Cain was Victor Montclair's half-brother. Précisément, Poirot confirmed. And when he uncovered the truth, he tried to claim his inheritance. Montclair's hands clenched into fists. Then the killer must be someone who stood to lose everything if Cain revealed his identity. Yes, Poirot said softly. His gaze fell upon Lady Edith Ashford. And that person is none other than you, madame. Gasps filled the room. Lady Ashford's face turned deathly white. This is preposterous. Is it? Poirot murmured. You killed Andrew Cain because you knew the truth, that he was the rightful heir to the Montclair fortune. If he had proven his claim, your family would have lost everything. And so you did what you had to do. You silenced him, just as your husband silenced Cyril Ashford years ago. Tears welled in Miss Carrington's eyes. You murdered your own nephew. Lady Ashford rose suddenly, her hands trembling. You can't prove any of this. Poirot merely smiled. Ah, madame, but I can. because in Andrew Kane's room I found a single page, a letter. He wrote it the very night of his death. It states, quite clearly, that if anything were to happen to him, it would be at your hands." Lady Ashford's lips parted in horror. Inspector Clements wasted no time. "Lady Ashford, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Andrew Kane." The woman's knees buckled, and she let out a strangled sob. The truth had finally caught up with her. As the inspector led her away, Poirot turned back to Montclair. The man sat in stunned silence. "Your father's sins cast long shadows, monsieur," Poirot said quietly. "But at last the past has come to light." Montclair exhaled heavily. "And what now?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Now, monsieur, now, justice is done." And with that, Hercule Poirot turned toward the fire, the warmth of the flames reflecting